Thought I knew my granddaughter. I had watched her grow from an infant into a quiet, watchful little girl, and I had convinced myself that the silence was simply who she was. 7 years of no words, no voice, nothing. The doctors had their theories. Her parents had their explanations, and I had mine. Though I kept it to myself, the way old men tend to do when they sense something wrong but can't yet name it. Her name is June. She turned 9 last October, and the day she finally spoke to me was the day I understood that her silence had never been emptiness. It had been protection. Let me back up. My daughter-in-law called on a Thursday. I remember because I was watching the evening news and they were doing a story about a cold front moving in from the Midwest, and I was thinking I needed to get the gutters cleaned before the first freeze. The phone buzzed on the counter and I almost didn't answer it. Dad. That's what my son's wife called me. Not my name, just Dad. She had done it since the wedding 17 years ago, and I had never quite warmed to it, though I never said so. We have a situation. Marcus has to go to Atlanta for work. A whole week, maybe 10 days. And my mother fell and she's in the hospital up in Cleveland. I need to go be with her. Of course, I said. Is she all right? She broke her hip. She's stable, but... Dad, the thing is, June, we don't have anyone who can take her. I turned off the television. Send her here. There was a pause. You sure? She can be. She's my granddaughter, I said. Send her here. I want to be honest about something. In that moment, I felt more than generosity. I felt something close to relief. I had wanted June to myself for a long time, away from the particular way her parents handled her. The sighing, the tense looks across the dinner table, the way her father would sometimes say, "She doesn't understand," right in front of her, as if the girl were furniture. It bothered me. It had always bothered me. June arrived Friday afternoon. My son dropped her off with a rolling suitcase and a backpack and a folder of papers, medical notes, her daily schedule, what she would and wouldn't eat. He handed it to me like a dossier. He kissed her on top of the head without bending down to her level and said, "Be good for Grandpa." And then he was in his truck and pulling out of my driveway before I had finished reading the top page. June stood on my porch with her suitcase handle still extended, looking up at me. I crouched down to her height. It took a little longer than it used to. My knees are what they were. "You hungry?" I asked. She looked at me. She had her father's eyes, dark and steady. She gave one small nod. "Good," I said, "because I made chili." Something shifted in her face. Not a smile exactly, but close. The first few days were quiet in a way I didn't mind. June communicated the way she always had, pointing, nodding, shaking her head, occasionally writing on a small notepad she kept in her backpack. She wasn't aggressive about it, wasn't frustrated. She seemed almost at ease in a way I hadn't seen at her parents' house. She sat with me through the morning news. She helped me rake the last of the leaves in the backyard without being asked. She had a patience about her that felt ancient, like she'd been carrying something heavy for a very long time, and had gotten good at making it look light. I have a habit I've had for 20 years. Every morning at 7:30, I take my blood pressure medication, 1 pill, small and white, with a glass of orange juice. My cardiologist adjusted the dosage after my heart episode 3 years ago, and I haven't missed a day since. I keep the pill bottle on the kitchen windowsill. Same spot every day. It's the kind of routine that becomes invisible after a while. You don't think about it. You just do it. On the third morning, I was standing at the kitchen counter filling my glass when I noticed June in the doorway. She was in her pajamas holding her notepad. I smiled at her. "Morning bug," I said. That had become my name for her over those 3 days. She seemed to tolerate it. She was staring at the pill bottle. Not the way a child stares at something curious, something more focused than that. She took 3 steps into the kitchen, picked up the bottle, and looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at me, then back at the bottle. "It's just my blood pressure pill," I told her. "I take it every morning. You've probably seen me do it before." She set the bottle down carefully, went to her notepad, wrote something, then turned it to face me. "Did someone give you new pills?" I felt something I couldn't name. a kind of chill in my chest that had nothing to do with the cold coming through the window. "These are the same pills I've always taken, sweetheart," I said. "Same bottle, same prescription." She stared at me for another moment. Then she took the notepad back and wrote again, slower this time, like she was choosing each word. "The bottle is the same. The pills look different. They used to be smaller and had a line across the middle." I looked at the bottle. I looked at the pills inside. "I am 67 years old and I have lived alone since my wife passed in 2019, and I have developed what I would call a reasonable relationship with my own mortality. I don't panic easily, but I stood in that kitchen on a Tuesday morning in November with my granddaughter's notepad in my hand, and I felt every one of those 67 years like weight on my shoulders." I put the bottle down. "June," I said, and I made sure I was looking directly at her when I said it, "how long have you known about this?" She didn't write anything. She just held up 3 fingers. 3 weeks. My son and his wife had come to visit me 3 weeks ago. They'd had dinner here. My son had offered to help me organize my medications. He'd made a joke about it, said I was getting to the age where I needed a system. I had laughed. I had let him. I sat down at the kitchen table because I needed to sit. June came and stood beside me. She didn't touch me. She wasn't a child who touched easily, but she stood close. Close enough that I could feel her there. "Why didn't you tell someone?" I asked. My voice came out quieter than I intended. She wrote, "I was scared they wouldn't believe me. I'm the one who doesn't talk." I had to press my lips together for a moment. "I believe you," I said. "I want you to know that. Whatever you tell me, I will believe you." She looked at me for a long time. She was 9 years old and she had a child's face and something behind her eyes that was not a child's thing at all. She had spent 7 years being silent in a house where silence was how you survived. I understood that in my bones right then, even before I knew everything. She sat down across from me and she wrote for a long time, filling 2 pages, tearing each one off and passing it across the table. Here is what June had seen and kept inside herself for 3 weeks. The evening my son and his wife came to dinner. She had been upstairs in the guest room, which is directly above the kitchen. She had come to the top of the stairs because she heard her parents' voices go low and urgent, the way they did when they didn't want her to hear. She had sat at the top of the stairs in the dark and she had listened. She did not write down everything she heard, but the parts she wrote down were enough. My son's wife had said something about the insurance policy. A substantial one as it happened. I had taken it out 15 years ago, updated it after my wife died, and my son was the primary beneficiary. His wife had said something about timelines, about how the doctor had said my heart wasn't getting better, about how if something happened in the next year before I changed anything. My son had said her name, sharp, like a warning. She had said, "The pills, Marcus. It's the pills. A higher dose looks the same. Nobody checks." June had sat at the top of those stairs and listened, and then gone back to her room and not slept. 3 weeks. She had carried it for 3 weeks, 9 years old. I didn't touch the pills that morning. I put the bottle in a Ziploc bag from my kitchen drawer and labeled it with a marker, date and time. I had watched enough true crime with my wife over the years to know that was the right thing to do. Then I called a man I had known for 30 years, a retired cop who lived 2 streets over and still had connections. His name is the kind of name people trust, old, solid, American. He picked up on the second ring and I told him what I had and he said, "Don't touch anything else. I'm coming over." While we waited, I made June a bowl of oatmeal with brown sugar because she'd nodded at that option 2 days ago and seemed to like it. I sat across from her while she ate. I wanted to say something that mattered, but I wasn't sure what words were big enough. So I just said, "You did the right thing," telling me, "Whatever happens next, you did exactly the right thing." She looked up from her oatmeal. She put her spoon down. And then, for the first time in 7 years, she opened her mouth and she spoke. Her voice was small and rough, like something that hadn't been used in a long time, which I suppose it hadn't. It cracked on the first syllable. But it was clear. "I was afraid," she said. "But I didn't want you to die, Grandpa." I am not a man who cries easily. I raised two sons in the 1980s and I worked 30 years in commercial construction, and I was not raised in a family where men wept at kitchen tables. But I want to be honest about what happened in that moment, because this story deserves honesty. I reached across the table and I held both of her small hands in mine, and I did not speak for a while because I could not. When I could, I said, "I'm not going anywhere, I promise." My friend arrived within 20 minutes. He took one look at the bag, made a call, and within an hour we had two plainclothes detectives in my living room. They were professional and quiet about it, which I appreciated. June sat in the kitchen with a coloring book I'd found in a bin of things I keep for grandchildren's visits. And I sat with the detectives and told them everything, including what June had heard and written down, which they asked to keep. The lab analysis took 8 days. I used those 8 days to call my attorney, a woman I've worked with since I bought my first property in 1989, and to update certain documents. I also had a conversation with my doctor, who confirmed that the pills in that bottle were not my prescription. The dosage was more than double what I had been prescribed. Sustained ingestion over several months, he told me carefully, would have caused cumulative cardiac damage. It would have looked on paper like natural deterioration. I want to write that plainly because I think it needs to be plain. My son and his wife were trying to kill me slowly enough that no one would notice. My son called several times during those 8 days. I answered twice, kept the conversations brief, gave nothing away. His wife texted asking how June was doing. I said fine. I said she was eating well and sleeping well. All of that was true. June was, in fact, doing better than I had seen her in years. She spoke more each day. Not a flood, nothing dramatic, just a word here, a sentence there, like a spigot that had been shut so long it needed to be eased open gradually. She told me she liked the chili I made. She told me she thought the neighbor's dog was very serious looking. She told me she used to talk when she was little, before she understood that being quiet was safer. That last thing she said while we were raking leaves on a Wednesday afternoon, and I had to stop and lean on my rake for a moment. Safer from what? I asked. She kept raking. From being in the way, she said. On day 9, my friend called and said it was time. My son and his wife were picked up at their home on a Thursday morning. My son called me from the police station, one call, which I did not answer. His attorney called mine. There were court dates, arraignments, the whole machinery of it. I will not pretend it didn't hurt. He is my son. Whatever he became, I raised him, and I loved him. And there is a grief in this that doesn't have a clean resolution. I want to be honest about that too. But I also want to be honest about June. The question of custody came up almost immediately. My daughter-in-law's mother, still recovering from her hip surgery in Cleveland, was not a realistic option. There was talk of foster placement while things were sorted through the courts. I told my attorney that was not going to happen. The process took 4 months. There was a home study, interviews, a guardian ad litem assigned to June, a patient woman who spent 2 full afternoons with her and later told me June had said unprompted that she wanted to stay with her grandfather because he believed me the first time. The judge granted permanent guardianship in March. I won't tell you everything is simple now. Guardianship at 67 is not what I planned for this chapter of my life. I had imagined retirement in a certain way. The garden, the grandchildren visiting on holidays, some travel maybe. What I have instead is a 9-year-old who has a therapist she sees on Tuesdays and who is learning, slowly and on her own schedule, how to be a child who speaks. Her teacher called me last month to say that June had volunteered to read aloud in class for the first time. She'd stumbled on a couple of words but hadn't stopped. The whole class had applauded. I cried in my truck in the school parking lot for about 10 minutes. Then I went home and made chili. June is not fixed. That's not the right word, and I don't think it's the right idea. She went through something that will take years to fully understand, and she carried a secret that no child should have to carry. And she is going to need time and patience and the kind of consistent love that doesn't ask anything in return. I know that. I am prepared for that. What I was not prepared for was this, the sound of her voice. After 7 years of silence, I expected it to feel like a miracle, dramatic, like something from a movie. But it didn't feel like that. It felt like coming home. Like hearing a song you hadn't realized you'd been missing until the first note played. Her voice sounds like her grandmother's a little. I don't tell her that because I don't want to put anything on her. But I think it when she talks. I think, there you are. There you finally are. She watches. She learns. She always was. We were just too busy talking to notice. I keep thinking about the gap between what a person shows and what a person carries. June carried 3 weeks of knowing. 3 weeks of watching me reach for that bottle every morning and saying nothing, because she had learned that silence was the price of safety in her own home. A 9-year-old child had done the math on that and made her peace with it, and I never knew. What changed was not the situation. The pills were already switched. The plan was already in motion. What changed was that she decided for the first time that someone was worth the risk of speaking. That I was worth it. I don't take that lightly. I don't think I ever will. There's something I've come to believe, not from a book or a sermon, but from 67 years of watching people make choices and live with them. What you do when no one is watching is the only real measure of your character. My son thought no one was watching. He forgot that the quietest person in the room was watching everything. June saw what he did, understood what it meant, and then after 7 years of silence, chose honesty over safety. That is a kind of moral courage I have not always seen in grown adults. She had it at 9 years old. I think about the sharpness of her mind, too. The details she noticed. The size of the pill, the line across the middle, the fact that something small had changed. That is not luck. That is attention. Children who are told they don't understand learn to understand quietly, on their own, in the margins. June had been doing that for years. She had been reading the room, reading people, filing things away. What her parents mistook for absence was actually presence of a different kind. The mind that goes inward doesn't stop working. Sometimes it works harder. And then there was what she did with what she knew. She didn't panic. She didn't run. She waited until she was somewhere safe, with someone she had decided to trust. And then she communicated it as clearly and carefully as she could, first in writing. Then when she understood that I believed her, in words. That is not just intelligence. That is steadiness under pressure that most people spend a lifetime trying to develop. I am her guardian now. Some days that word feels too small for what it actually means. I am the person she trusts to believe her. I am the person she practices her voice with, sentence by sentence, day by day. Last week she read aloud in class. Her teacher told me she stumbled on a word and kept going. That detail has stayed with me. The stumble and the keeping going. That's the whole of it, really. That's what it looks like when someone decides that the world is worth speaking into again. What her parents built on greed collapsed the moment a child chose integrity. That is not poetic coincidence. That is simply how it works. The things we do in the dark have a way of being seen by the people we least expect, and the courage of one honest person, even a small one, even a quiet one, is enough to change everything. I reach for my orange juice every morning at 7:30 and I think about that.